Part 1. The Observer. The atmospheric scrubbers of the observational spire hummed with a gentle, pervasive frequency that Xylia of the Vthari found deeply calming. It was the sound of pure efficiency, of environmental control, of reason. From her vantage point 2 kilometers above the designated study zone, Human Settlement Cluster 7B, colloquially Portsmouth, the world below was a tapestry of fascinating, if primitive, biological and social processes. Her multifaceted ocular implants zoomed in, capturing data streams, thermal signatures of clustered mammals and domiciles, the chaotic yet patterned flow of combustion engine vehicles, the exchange of material goods in designated commerce zones. Xylia was a xenoanthropologist of the Seventh Spire, and her mission was simple: compile a comprehensive, dispassionate report on human socio-biological dynamics for the Vthari archives. The Vthari were a species of elegant logic, their forms crystalline and subtly luminous, communicating through modulated light and resonant harmonic tones. Reproduction for them was a biannual convergence, a graceful, public merging of light spectra and mineral matrices in the central spire, resulting in the fission of a new, fully formed consciousness from the parents' combined energy patterns. It was beautiful, clean, and entirely intellectual. Humanity, by contrast, was a riot of messy, wet, inexplicable biology. Xylia had deciphered their basic nutritional intake, their sleep cycles, their conflict rituals. But one primary data point remained frustratingly opaque, buried under layers of cultural taboo, bizarre ritual, and conflicting information streams: reproduction. Her databases were filled with fragmented, often contradictory records. Medical texts described clinical biological mechanics. Entertainment media depicted everything from violent, simplified clashes to absurdly sentimentalized rituals. Religious and cultural documents imposed layers of prohibition and meaning that seemed to vary with every geographic subgroup. The core experience, the why and the how it felt, was missing. It was a gap in her data as glaring as a vacuum. Her current subject of focus was a pair of humans, Designation Unit James and Unit Alara. She had tracked their cohabitation for 1.3 local years. Their interactions were a constant stream of low-grade conflict, resource sharing, non-reproductive physical contact, and vocal exchanges that ranged from harmonious to dissonant. They were, according to her probability algorithms, a prime reproductive pair. Yet no reproduction had occurred. Tonight, the data stream shifted. Xylia watched as James and Alara's evening followed its usual pattern: the preparation and consumption of nutrient paste, a period of passive entertainment watching a flickering screen, and then a movement to their sleeping platform. But the thermal signatures showed elevated temperatures. The audio feed, which she usually filtered for linguistic data, caught a change in breathing rhythms, less regular, deeper. The subtle, subsonic vibrations of their domicile changed. Her implants zoomed to maximum, employing spectroscopic analysis. Pheromone density in the room spiked exponentially, a complex cocktail of esters, alcohols, and molecules her sensors could barely categorize. She saw them engage in extended tactile contact, far beyond the usual brief greetings. It evolved into a full-body entanglement, a chaotic and energetically inefficient series of movements on the sleeping platform. Xylia's crystalline form dimmed slightly in confusion. Was this a conflict? A cooperative exercise? A mutual grooming ritual gone awry? She cross-referenced the biometrics, heart rates accelerating, stress hormones present, but alongside dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins. It was a physiological puzzle, signs of distress commingled with signs of pleasure and bonding. Then she saw the specific act. Her central processing nexus, cooled by liquid helium, stuttered. She recoiled from the viewer panel, her light patterns flashing a rapid, distressed cyan. Inefficient. hygienically unsound, structurally precarious. Her harmonic tones murmured to the empty spire. The biological mechanics, once abstract in a text file, were now vividly, viscerally real. The fluid exchange, the potential for pathogen transfer, the sheer undignified vulnerability of it. It looked less like a creation ritual and more like a clumsy, desperate struggle. So that's how humans reproduce? The alien woman was shocked. But as the initial wave of revulsion passed, a deeper, more powerful impulse activated within her. Curiosity. Not the dispassionate, archival curiosity of a scientist, but a raw, burning, personal need to understand. Why would a species evolve such a risky, convoluted method? What possible payoff could justify this chaos? How did the experience translate from that baffling physical struggle into the profound social bonds and creative drives her broader data sets indicated? The shock was the catalyst. The curiosity became an obsession. She needed to know not just the what, but the feel. The data gap was no longer an academic problem. It was a chasm in her understanding of the universe itself. Part 2. The experiment. Protocol dictated observation only. The prime directive of the Seventh Spire, though they didn't call it that, was strict non-interference. But Xylia rationalized that to truly understand, she needed a closer perspective. She needed to interface. Using Spire technology, she crafted a synthetic biological vessel, a human female form, designed to be unremarkable, with baseline aesthetics drawn from Portsmouth's population. She programmed it with fluent language modules and basic motor functions. The consciousness within, however, was purely Xylia. She would remote pilot this shell, streaming sensory data back to her true form in the spire. It was a monumental risk, a violation of tenet. But the curiosity was afire now, burning away caution. She introduced herself to the human social stream as Leah, a quiet transplant from a distant city. Her cover was thin, but humanity, she had noted, was often forgiving of social oddities in newcomers. She found work in a communal food dispensary Alara frequented. She observed James and Alara not through sensors, but through human eyes that could be downcast, that could shy away, that could meet another's in a way her optical implants never could. She felt the heat of the kitchen, the ache in the synthetic muscles after a long shift. She tasted the human nutrients, a shocking, overwhelming cascade of sensations compared to her nutrient plasma. She learned the weight of a smile, the sting of a harsh word. The data was no longer clean numbers. It was smeared with feeling. She became a tentative friend to Alara, who found Leah's quiet intensity and strange questions oddly endearing. "You're like an alien sometimes." Alara laughed once, and Xylia's heart, the synthetic one, skipped a beat. One evening, after a shared meal, Alara grew emotional. She spoke of her desire to have a child with James, of the fear that it wouldn't happen, of the pressure that made the once spontaneous act of reproduction feel like a clinical, stressful duty. Xylia listened, recording not just the words but the tremor in the voice, the sheen of unshed tears. Here was the context, the biological imperative wrapped in layers of hope, fear, love, and social expectation. "It's not just the act, you know?" Alara said, swirling her beverage. "It's supposed to be about connection. It's how you show each other you're choosing each other, over and over in the most basic way. Even when it's awkward or frustrating or just silly. It's us. And maybe, if we're lucky, it becomes more than us." Connection. Choice. These were abstract concepts in Thari reproduction. A convergence was a logical compatibility, a harmonious blending. It was beautiful, but it was not a choice born of persistent longing. It was not a struggle against fear. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place not with Alara, but with a man named Leo. He was a musician, a friend of James's, with kind eyes and a patience that matched Leah's deliberate way of moving through the world. He was curious about her, this woman who seemed to see everything for the first time. He taught her about music, not as sound waves, but as emotion translated into vibration. He took her to feel the rumble of a bass line in her chest, the piercing sweetness of a violin. One night, walking under the sodium glow of the city lights, he kissed her. Or, he kissed the shell. For Xylia, remotely piloting from the spire, it was a system shock. The tactile sensors in the shell's lips fired a torrent of data: pressure, warmth, texture. But the data was drowned in a cascade of effect. Her true crystalline form flared with unstable, chaotic light patterns. Her harmonic core emitted a discordant, private tone of sheer astonishment. This simple, culturally coded touch protocol triggered a feedback loop between the shell's simulated nervous system and her own consciousness that she could not have predicted. It felt like a catalyst, like a key turning in a lock she didn't know she possessed. She began spending more time with Leo, not as a research subject, but as a participant. She learned the slow, trust-building dance of human intimacy, the conversations that lasted until dawn, the comfort of shared silence, the electric thrill of a glancing touch.
She started to want
not just data, but connection. The shell's programming began to blur with her own desires. The line between observer and participant dissolved. Finally, the night came. It was not planned. It was the culmination of laughter, of shared wine, of a song Leo played that made something in Xylia's, chest ache. One moment they were talking on his sofa, the next, the space between them had vanished. As they moved to his sleeping platform, Xylia did something unprecedented. She severed the real-time data stream to the Spire archives. This experience would not be recorded. It would be hers alone. And then she fully immersed. She let the shell's sensors flood her consciousness, shutting down her analytical overrides. She stopped observing and simply felt the weight of another body, the shocking, sublime heat of skin on skin, the scent of him, not as a chemical breakdown, but as memory, safety, and excitement, the clumsy, beautiful awkwardness of limbs aligning, the sounds, breath, heartbeat, a gasp that was hers and not hers. The act itself was still, on some level, biologically absurd. But she finally understood the payoff. It was not in spite of the vulnerability, but because of it. The complete surrender of physical control, the mutual trust required, the sheer, terrifying exposure. That was the crucible. In that chaos, there was a moment of pure, wordless communication. A harmony not of light, but of spirit. A connection so total it momentarily erased the boundaries of the self. It was inefficient, risky, messy, and profoundly, illogically magnificent. For the Thari, creation was a fission, a splitting of light. For humans, it was a fusion, a desperate, glorious attempt to merge, from which new light might spark. Afterward, lying in the dark, Leo asleep beside her, Xylia within Leo wept with the shell's tear ducts. She wept for the beauty of it. She wept for her own people, whose elegant, clean existence now seemed sterile and lonely by comparison. And she wept for the impossible chasm between her two selves. Part 3. The Choice. The crisis came swiftly. Her unauthorized immersion had caused a power fluctuation in the spire. The Oversight Council knew she had breached protocol. A command pulsed through her core. Terminate experiment. Return to pure observation. Await retrieval for debriefing and recalibration. Recalibration. They would scrub the contaminated data streams, purge the emotional impressions, and return her to a state of pure logic. They would erase Leo's kiss, Ilara's tears, the feeling of fused breath in the dark. They would make her forget the fusion. Simultaneously, in the human world, she discovered a consequence she had, in her scientific hubris, not fully anticipated. The shell was perfect. Too perfect. It had simulated a reproductive system with flawless accuracy. Leah was pregnant. The news, delivered by a medical scanner, sent another shock through her system. This was no longer abstract biology. This was a potential new consciousness, born from that fusion, growing within the vessel she piloted. A child that would be genetically human, but whose genesis was overseen by an alien mind. A living, breathing data point that could never be archived. Leo was overjoyed. Ilara, when told, cried happy tears and offered to guide her through every step. James clapped Leo on the back. Leah was enveloped in a web of human celebration, support, and planning, a social response to reproduction that was as integral to the process as the act itself. Xylia stood at the precipice of two existences. In the spire, she was a deviant scientist facing corrective amnesia. Her people offered clarity, order, and the cold, beautiful silence of pure thought. On Earth, she was Leah, a woman loved by a man, carrying a child, woven into a community. She was entangled in a messy, painful, glorious web of feeling. She knew heartbreak, joy, anxiety, and a love that felt like gravity. The retrieval beam was set for the next lunar cycle. She had to decide. The night before the retrieval, she met Leo on the cliffside overlooking the city and the distant sea. He held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "You've been distant, Leah," he said softly. "Is it the baby? Are you scared?" She looked at him, using the shell's eyes to memorize the lines of his face in the moonlight. She had the data now. She could write the definitive report. Human reproduction is a high-risk, low-efficiency biological process justified by a profound socio-emotional payoff, the creation of vulnerability-based bonds, and the generation of new consciousness within a supportive community framework. It is experiential, not purely mechanistic. But the report was meaningless. The truth was in his hand warming hers. "I am not from here, Leo," she said, the words finally leaving her. She told him everything. The spire, the observation, the shell. She spoke not as a scientist, but as a being who had discovered a new sense, like sight to the blind. She told him of the convergence of her people, and how it now seemed like watching a flawless crystal compared to holding a warm, beating heart. He listened, his face moving through stages of disbelief, shock, and wonder. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at the stars she had come from. "So, you're not Leah," he finally said, his voice rough. "I am," she said, placing his hand on the shell's abdomen. "More than I was ever Xylia," she observed. "Leah lives. This life we've made, it's real to me. More real than any truth in any archive." "Will they take you?" he asked, fear cracking his voice. "They will try." He pulled her close. "Then fight. Stay." In her spire form, Xylia initiated the final protocol, but not the one the council commanded. She began a transfer, not of data, but of consciousness. A risky, forbidden procedure that would permanently sever her connection to the Thari neural net and anchor her essence entirely within the human shell, with all its limitations and mortal fragility. It would be irreversible. She would be human, in every way that mattered. As the retrieval beam lanced down from the sky, invisible to human eyes, she stood with Leo on the cliff. She looked up, not with her spire sensors, but with Leah's eyes. A harmonic tone, meant for her alone, echoed in the core she was abandoning. "You choose this impermanence? This pain? This chaos. Through Leah's lips, Xylia sent her final transmission, a simple pulse of meaning, not logic. I choose the fusion. The beam faded. The connection severed. In the spire, Xylia's crystalline form went dark, inert, a vacant vessel. In a small clinic in Portsmouth, Leah gasped and stumbled into Leo's arms, a sudden, overwhelming flood of purely human sensation grounding her. The salt air, his solid strength, the flutter deep within her, the ache of loss for a home that was never home, and the terrifying, exhilarating certainty of a choice made. 9 months later, in a room filled with pain, effort, and shouting, another shocking, messy, inefficient, and utterly human process, Leah gave birth to a daughter. When the tiny, wailing being was placed on her chest, skin to skin, the final piece of understanding clicked into place. This was the payoff. This was the more than us. It wasn't just the making of a new person. It was the making of herself. Xylia, the observer, was gone. Leah, the participant, the mother, the lover, was born in that same moment. Years later, under that same cliffside sky, her daughter, curious, bright-eyed, pointed to the stars. "Mama, what's out there?" Leah held her close, smelling her hair, feeling the solid, warm weight of her. She thought of crystalline spires and harmonic tones, of a life of clean, silent observation. She looked at Leo, his hair graying, his eyes still kind. She smiled, a human smile, full of memory and wonder. "Many things, my love," she whispered, "but nothing more amazing than this." And in her heart, the alien woman, now fully, completely human, was no longer shocked. She was content, and still always curious.